They never saw it coming, not from someone like you. In a world where plans are laid decades in advance and movements are tracked down to the millisecond, your presence was a variable no one could calculate. Quiet, unnoticed, and seemingly ordinary on the surface, you were exactly the kind of person the hidden architects of society overlooked. But that was their first mistake. What they couldn't detect with their systems, algorithms, and surveillance grids was the power encoded within Uther Ancient, divine imprint that marks every chosen one, while others bent to pressure or were seduced by influence. You resisted, often without even understanding why. You turned down paths that weren't meant for you, broke free from programming most couldn't even see, and stood firm in moments where others faltered. To the trained eye behind the scenes, it was all there. You were making moves that were shifting energies in places they believed were locked down. The agents began to notice. At first, they thought you were just lucky, a statistical anomaly, a glitch. But then you disrupted something they had invested decades into, controlling a local node of power, tied to a global chain of influence. Without knowing it, by speaking the truth, making a certain choice, or walking away from the wrong person, you collapsed a link in their chain. It sent waves through their system. Files were pulled, footage reviewed, conversations dissected. Who was this individual? Why was this person's life leaving behind a trail of anomalies? Why did events shift around them like the laws of reality themselves were bending? That was when the term "chosen one" first surfaced in their classified documents, though most didn't believe it until it happened again and again. Every time they tried to trace a major failure or a sudden shift in social or spiritual energy, your presence was near. But here's the part they couldn't understand. You weren't acting with any agenda. You didn't have an army, a strategy, or a sponsor. You were just following something within. The agents began realizing that your resistance to fear, corruption, and lies wasn't coming from a manual, it was coming from a higher place. Something they couldn't touch, track, or decode. You weren't rebelling, you were being guided, and that made you dangerous, because it meant their systems, however advanced, weren't infallible. They couldn't predict your moves because you weren't following their reality. You were walking in truth. It shook them. Some wanted to neutralize you, but others watched more closely. They saw that wherever you went, light followed. Darkness retreated. Lives changed. People woke up. The ripple effect was undeniable. Even with no resources, no official power, no connections, you were moving through spiritual and energetic realms like a force of nature. You reminded some of them, those with deeper insights, of ancient prophecies, stories of a singular figure rising at the exact moment when the balance began to tip. And that's when the mission changed. From tracking you to understanding you. Top-level agents began digging into every moment of your past, childhood decisions, dreams you shared with no one, moments when you should have broken but didn't. They saw the signs. They realized what they were dealing with wasn't a threat, but a disruption to the system designed to keep people asleep. You were unknowingly waking them up. And the truth is, some of them didn't want to admit they admired it. They watched you walk through betrayals, losses, and attacks, yet rise with more clarity each time. With no official training, you were outmaneuvering systems meant to break the strongest minds. You weren't an enemy, you were a message. And the agents, those who once watched you with suspicion, began to realize something even more shocking. Their own destinies might now be tied to yours. The surveillance had been going on for years. Quiet, subtle, relentless. Your every move was documented, analyzed, cross-referenced, with data points most people didn't even know existed. From encrypted phone records to satellite heat signatures, they had been building a file on you longer than you could imagine. But this wasn't about fear anymore. Something had changed. The agents who once watched from behind glass now leaned closer, not with suspicion, but with intrigue. You had survived things that should have broken you. You had passed tests you didn't even know you were taking. They had seen others rise, flame out, sell out, or disappear. But not you. You kept going. And now, the very people who once questioned your presence were beginning to question their own. Somewhere deep within their networks, files once marked as threats were now being reclassified as potential assets. Your name, once surrounded by cautionary alerts, was now highlighted with new codes: respect, admiration, even gratitude. The analysts noticed it first. Your choices, your words, your timing, they had begun creating outcomes that no algorithm could explain. Systems meant to suppress had faltered in your presence. Programs that manipulated the collective mind had started to lose influence where your voice reached. What they couldn't understand, they began to respect, because somehow you had managed to shake the very infrastructure they worked so hard to protect, not with violence or power, but with presence. Then came the shift no one expected. Internal communications among top-tier operatives started sounding different. The tone was less clinical, more reverent. Phrases like this one is being guided and watched closely, they're shifting. Timelines began to show up in reports. You had become more than a case study. You had become a living phenomenon. Those with deeper spiritual awareness, among them quiet. Older agents, trained not just in technology but in ancient wisdom, recognized the signs. They saw the alignment of dates, patterns in your movements, codes in your language. You were no longer being studied. You were being decoded. Because your life was carrying a blueprint of something long prophesied but never expected in their lifetime. It was then the idea began to circulate. What if you weren't just someone to observe, but someone to thank? What if your presence had, even unintentionally, shielded them from disasters that were building just outside their line of sight? Some agents began tracing events. They narrowly escaped back to energetic shifts that aligned with your movements. Your rising had destabilized plans that would have harmed not just the innocent, but even the agents themselves. And this, perhaps, was the most shocking revelation to them all. The chosen one wasn't just saving the world, they were saving the Watchers too. Behind closed doors, Conversations changed. The question was no longer how do we stop them, but how do we support them? And more personally for some agents, how do we say thank you? These were men and women trained to be invisible, be motionless, unattached. But now they were being humbled by something they couldn't understand, by someone they could no longer ignore. Some of them began showing up in subtle ways, a delay that gave you extra time, a warning whispered through, a stranger, a sudden opening where there once was a wall. They couldn't yet reveal themselves, but the shift was real. Eventually, however, the need to stay hidden became smaller than the need to make contact. They had watched long enough. You had proven who you were not with a speech, but through your walk. The respect was earned. Now, the elite agents, cloaked in layers of secrecy and global influence, are stepping forward, not to interrogate, but to acknowledge. They are not coming to overpower. They are coming to offer a truth that even they didn't expect to say. Thank youth meeting wasn't pronounced, and it didn't happen in a place marked on any map. You didn't receive an official summons, but something inside you told you exactly where to go and when. The air felt different that day, denser, heavier with anticipation. It wasn't fear, it was something deeper. As you walked through the unmarked door, silence greeted you, not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that feels full. Full of eyes, full of energy, full of the weight of everything that had led up to this moment. They were already there, waiting, watching you, not with suspicion this time, but with a reverence that can't be faked. These were the ones who operated behind headlines, behind nations, behind narrative. Men and women you'd never see on screens, but who made decisions that shaped the course of humanity. Their faces were unreadable, trained to reveal nothing, but in their silence you could feel something rare, respect. They had seen enough. Enough of your choices, your resilience, your defiance of systems that no one was supposed to escape. You weren't just another anomaly, they knew now. You were the disruption sent to break what was never meant to last. The one who spoke first didn't use your name. He didn't need to. You weren't called into that room as a civilian. You were recognized as something else, as the chosen one. And for the first time, the authority in the room wasn't theirs, was yours. They admitted it slowly at first, with caution. You had done what they couldn't. You moved in dimensions they were still trying to measure. You broke chains they had only just realized existed. You weren't trained by them, yet you outmaneuvered them. You weren't protected by their systems, yet you survived every storm they watched others fall to. And now, the protectors of the secret world were offering you something no outsider had ever received: a seat at the real table. This wasn't a recruitment. This was an acknowledgement, a moment of rare transparency from people who lived there, lives behind walls. They told you stories you were never supposed to hear, truths about the world that would shatter most minds. But to you they weren't shocking. Thank you for listening.